Good morning, everybody. Want to welcome you all to the Walton Center for Planetary Health and a very special presentation that we've got here today about this building and the site, and as well as some special new branding that we're going to have to help identify this very unique facility for the university a little bit further as we move forward. Before we get started, first, want to thank Starbucks Center for the Future of People on the Planet for the coffee tasting and refreshments outside. That was a really great little treat that we had. And as many of you know, this week is where we celebrate Earth Day. It is on Saturday, April 22nd. We are going to be having our Earth Day celebration on Friday, beginning at 9 a.m. That will include a special presentation by the Arizona Governor, Katie Hobbs. That will be right at 9. And then that'll be followed by a Arizona's Water Future panel that'll include Jay Familietti and Amber Wudich, and will be moderated by Peter Schlosser. Then we'll have a panel that is about students who are change makers, and that'll feature a number of undergraduate and graduate students, and it's moderated by our School of Sustainability undergraduate, Elizabeth Quigley. And then we will have an interactive energy policymaker experience that is going to be powered by Decision Theater, and it will be guided by Professor Manfred Labuchler, and that will actually engage everybody in the audience to get on their phones and help drive some decision-making concepts around solar power and solar energy here in Arizona. So that should be a lot of fun. And then afterwards, we're going to have a couple food trucks in the atrium to just continue the afternoon. So hope you all can be here and join us, especially at 9 a.m. when the governor will be here. So I want to welcome Julie Russ, my colleague from Institute of Human Origins. My name is Jason Franz. I am with the Global Futures Laboratory here, and we are the primary tenants of this facility. Just start off with a little kind of backstory. ASU legend tells us that many years ago, President Michael Crow had a vision for a facility where many of ASU's leading faculty, researchers, and students would be able to collaborate and explore issues and challenges that stretch from our human origins to our global futures. 1 year ago, this building was given a special dedication event that included interviews with Jane Goodall and Al Gore and many others that celebrated the realization of that very vision. Today, we're going to look at really more of what this building does, how it performs, and what it's intended to be, as well as the history behind it. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask Julie to give a little bit more background about the Institute of Human Origins.
So I don't have a script this morning. I kind of was joined this effort as late, but I do want to tell you a little bit about the Institute of Human Origins. Probably now about 6 years ago, our former director was at one of the directors' meetings with President Crow, and he was talking about the Institute of Human Origins. And he said, he looked at Bill and he said, they're connecting the human past with the global future. And Bill came back to my office and said, hey, listen to what President Crow just said. And so I said, oh yeah, that's it. That's our tagline now for the future. And I started using it. Well, what happened a year ago is that the Institute of Human Origins moved into this wonderful building. And now we're literally in a building connecting the human past to the global future and the Global Futures Lab. So we're so thankful to be here. One of the terrific things is about 4 years ago, I don't know when that was, Tom, Bill, Kimball, and I had the opportunity to sit down with the architects, Grimshaw and Architekton and ASU, and give them our wish list for our floor, for our space. We had no idea how that would turn out. It was all in the hands of the architects, but we had some really great ideas of how the Institute of Human Origins, which is the premier place actually on the globe to study human origins. Our scientists study human origins from the stones and bones, all the way through human uniqueness and cooperation, why Homo sapiens are really the only species on the planet like it. You have hundreds of bears, thousands of butterflies. Homo sapiens are it. There were many different creatures that lived in the past and went extinct. And so, which is another great message about why we are partnered and try to understand the global future. But so the Architekton and Grimshaw designed us an amazing floor. Number one, terrific education outreach space that we have for our K through 12. We hosted, and we've done this twice now, 120 sixth graders, which is a little, scary when you have all that energy coming in. But our mission, our education outreach mission, is a very important part of who the Institute of Human Origins is. And then we have premier research spaces and labs and places for our graduate students and undergraduate students to learn. So if you do have any time, if you haven't been up to the second floor, please come up. I'll give you the tour, impromptu or planned, either one. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Julie. What Julie and her team were able to do with that floor too, especially in terms of the archive of the fossils and other archive elements, are really amazing. So please do take some time to get up there. It also includes the Jane Goodall archives that were recently gifted to the university from the Gombe Research Center. In terms of the Global Futures Laboratory, and I think Institute of Human Origins, this really is the first opportunity that we have had to have our own dedicated research space and comprehensive office spaces for each other. And the thing, I've had the opportunity to give a lot of tours of this facility, as it's been a very in-demand place to visit. And one of the key things I point out, secondarily to the site history, because it really is a unique space for this intersection of what we do. The other part is the thoughtful design behind it, of allowing us to be as optimally collaborative as possible. I really like to point out there are hardly any doors that section off this building. There's just a couple that really are intended as fire walls, I believe, but it really is connecting people in a way that we just haven't had before. But also we have dedicated research space we've never had before. This is now the largest facility for research on the campus. We're very, very fortunate in that way. So today we're endeavoring each day to better understand where we come from, who we are, where we are going in ways that are ethical and equitable, while ensuring that all inhabitants of this planet may thrive. And so to talk more about that, we have a couple of very special presentations for you that will allow you to hopefully better appreciate this facility and structure, as well as the site it rests upon and the inspiration that it creates for all of us. So first up, we're going to introduce a panel that's going to provide insights on the design, sustainability, and history of this building and land. So please welcome from ASU, ASU Historical Preservationist, Gene Robinson. We have a principal architect for the architecture firm Architekton, Tom Reilly. Archaeologist for SRP, Dan Garcia. And the principal engineer for SRP, Jorge Garcia. And so I believe, Tom, I'm handing it over to you.
Thanks, Jason. First of all, disclaimer. We're here representing a huge team. There were scores of ASU departments involved with this. Hundreds, literally hundreds of architects, designers, engineers, thousands of craftsmen that put this building together. So we are very honored to be here. And I think Julie was being modest. A lot of her and Bill's ideas are in concrete upstairs, along with Meredith and the team from Global Futures. So that's one of the things we like doing, is helping people design their own spaces. So that's very exciting. We normally start this off with a quick review of the building. I'm going to make this quick because you guys kind of know it. A lot of the people we talk to don't. We ended up with this triangular site, which is probably the hardest site I've ever worked on in 40 years. It's it's important for a lot of reasons, but one of them is the way that it links the ASU campus, the research corridor, the new Novus Innovation District, and the community at large. So it's a rare site for the ASU Tempe campus. ASU had a lot of goals for this site. Here's some of them. The one that's not up there is that they wanted a place where any researcher on any of the ASU campuses could come show the public how they're changing the world. So the reason this building, I'll say the word porous probably too many times this morning, but the reason it's so porous and invites the public in is that was one of the goals. So that's the patio above us. That's the extra landings, the extra size on the stair landings. That's the connection between light rail and the Novus district. The whole goal was to get the public through here so that they could see what's happening in this building, as well as seeing what's happening on all the ASU campuses. So less than 50% of the building touches the ground, which is kind of amazing on its own. And part of that was because of some of the historic elements we're going to talk about, and some of it was trying to recognize and honor the diagonal paths and translations across the site, the historic. So when you go up, it looks very much like the courtyard building that you experienced. So it's really sort of two different ideas on the same site stacked on top of each other. So again, that ground plane and all the porosity. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that that brown square is a future restaurant, and it'll be kind of exciting. The other thing that's going to happen is Novus is looking at 3 restaurants at the other end of the bridge. So we're getting really close to being able to build this out. Wet labs on the north bar, dry labs to the east, and then office support on the south became sort of the model. We integrated the classrooms throughout the building. And again, the goal of how do we get students that may not have any business in this building to rub elbows with what you guys are doing. I will tell you the design team was constantly amazed by what was going to happen in this building, and we're very excited to see that that's happening. We too got excited about, Julie, the link of the past and the future. IHO ended up being on the lower floor for a lot of reasons, but part of it was this diagram, and it was exciting to be able to do that. Being in the room the first time the scientists kind of understood what that was really fun. And Julie, you were there. There was a vibration that I rarely feel. It was pretty cool. So it's about creating this courtyard building and this space for the public and for the users of the building to have these collisions. And this is a year ago today. So it's really fun to see it activated. We're going to talk more about this later about the scan, linking the light rail to the Novus district across the street was a big issue. I think we'll see that even more as Novus develops, and we'll see the stream of people coming through here, especially on game day. This is this rail stop has the largest number of passengers in the valley, so that's kind of exciting.
I see how many things I can juggle in my hands here. Morning, everyone. My name is Dan Garcia. I'm an archaeologist with Salt River Project. And if you didn't know, Salt River Project provides power and water here in the valley and operates and manages the canal that goes through the courtyard here on behalf of the federal government, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. So I wasn't involved with this project when it was first being designed and built. My involvement began just a few years ago as ASU was embarking on fulfilling one of the requirements of the Bureau of Reclamation, which was to place interpretive signage along the canal. And so what you see on the screen is signage that's not yet up here at the building, but will be, I understand, soon. Tom could talk to you more about how that's going to roll out here. But what I wanted to talk about here is that this sign is acknowledging principally the land here that ASU occupies is native land, and it's the ancestral connections of this land to the modern O'odham, Pipash, Hopi, Zuni, Yavapai, Apache, and other native cultures that occupied this place a long time ago and continue to today. It also tells the story of the first use of this place by the Huhugam. And those are the ancestors of today's Akimel O'odham. Akimel O'odham are the native communities that are around Phoenix, to the north, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, and to the south, the Gila River Indian community. Nearly all of downtown Tempe and a lot of the ASU Tempe campus are within a large archaeological site Archaeologists call it La Plaza. It's a Spanish name, of course. It probably has another native name and certainly goes by a number of designations. But it was an ancient Huagam village that was nestled among farmlands and canals on this side of the river. Now, archaeological investigations were initiated because we're in an archaeological site before the construction here began. So here on the sign, you see a picture of a little piece of pottery. It looks really big on the screen right now, but that's actually a very small little thing, probably a child's toy. We believe it dates to about 950 to 1150 AD. Artifacts that were recovered from this site when it was excavated were curated here at ASU at the school, what they used to call the School of Anthropology, which is now the School of Human Evolution and Social Change, I believe is what it's called, right? So I don't think they're on display there, but that's where you can find them to this day. Juggle my many pages here. Okay. There it is. Okay. So here's a photo of some of the archaeological excavation happening before any construction happened here. And so what they did was dig exploratory trenches to see what archaeological remains or human burials might have been present here. And this work was done in compliance with state and local laws, which require ASU to conduct this type of investigation when affecting an archaeological site. So about 25 of these long trenches were excavated on this triangle of property here, and 47 archaeological features were found. What I mean when I say archaeological feature is it was something that was constructed or affected by humans. Now, oh, I went too far there, did I? Let's go back. I got a trigger finger here, so. In terms of what the crews found, surprisingly, they didn't find a lot of ancient houses. That's kind of what we expected. We're in the middle of a village here. We thought we'd find a lot of houses. But rather, they found a series of pits, cooking hearths, so think fireplaces, where people would prepare food or make themselves warm, and ephemeral areas that were used, that were indicated to archaeologists that there were farm fields and areas besides agricultural canals that were being used. I need one more hand. Okay. So evidence was found here for the cultivation of corn, cotton, squash, agave, and cholla cactus on the site. Yeah. In this picture, you see the archaeologists who were working on the site where they found a grinding stone, or what we call a metate, which showed evidence of grinding corn and or other plants that were used for food production here on this site. The excavation also revealed evidence of two ancient irrigation canals. So we have what is ostensibly a modern irrigation canal through the courtyard here. But this revealed evidence of an additional two ancient canals, one dating to about 1150 AD through 1300, and one which may have been decommissioned about 1400, and probably used on a year-round basis. So it's really hard to see what a canal looks like when you're looking at it in dirt. So the archaeologist made an illustration of it just to kind of show you what the canal looked like if you were looking in a trench at it. And those heavy black lines are the outlines of the edges of a canal if you were looking at it in profile, as if you cut a slice through it. And what they show us is that these canals have been used and maintained and modified over time many, many times. So for nearly a millennium, the Huagam built these irrigation canals, this whole system of irrigation canals by hand, using stone and wooden tools to support farming or otherwise living in this inhospitable desert. So this is a map of the impressive canal system as we believe it looked. Archaeologists, this is all the canals that were used by the ancient Huagam. And it was the ingenuity of these people that laid the groundwork for the SRP canal system, some of which follows the same ancient waterways to this day. So here on the next map, I'll overlay these blue canals. These are canals that were used by the first American settlers of this valley starting in the late 1800s. And you'll notice those blue canals follow the same paths as the ancient canals. In fact, many of these, we believe, were the ancient canals that were simply dug out and repurposed as canals again in the 1860s. And of course, here you see a map of the SRP canal system today, overlaid in red, along with those historic canals and the ancient canals. And the point here is to show that the SRP canal system waters the same places and runs in the same places as the ancient Huagam system did once upon a time. All right, this is an artist reconstruction. I throw this in just to give you an idea when you're standing in this space now. If you were to look back in time, this is something along the lines of what it might have looked like. Would have had these smaller irrigation canals, irrigating farm fields with crops being grown along the side of the river. And here's just another view of the same type of thing. Okay. Let me go back a view because I want to tell you one anecdote before I move on and turn this over to Jean. There we go, that one there. So one of the interesting things about this project, because these types of archaeological projects, they find things when we do excavation, and then they do all sorts of laboratory analyses, and then it all starts to sink in. And as we do more and more projects, we compare notes to the data we found on previous projects. So one of the interesting things about this project is when the archaeologists found some of these archaeological features next to the canal, these piles of ancient plant material that were rotted out, decomposing. So the archaeologists were able to recover some of those, and they could tell that they were grasses and plants that would grow in aquatic environments. They came from the canal and were cleaned out. We're also able to use radiocarbon dating, which is a technique for finding out the age of organic things. And when they applied radiocarbon dating to these samples, they found out that they dated between 1450 and 1850 AD. And that's a really interesting result because history tells us this valley was abandoned by the Huagam in about 1450, and that nobody lived here until American settlers come in the 1860s. And yet on this site, there was evidence of people in that time in between when nobody's supposed to be here, cleaning out the canals and still farming. And this is a developing story. We still don't know the answers, but it's changing our understanding of history, which really supports a lot of the Atum history that they never abandoned this place and have been here ever since. It may have been a smaller population, but they were certainly here farming. All right, the last bit I'll talk about here, and I'm going to turn it over to Jean next, is about the canal a little bit. So I said there's a modern canal here, but I wasn't really being truthful there. It's actually a historic canal, and it's actually a canal that we know historically as the Kirkland-McKinney Ditch. It's also sometimes called the Hayden Ditch, and it was dug out in 1869. And that makes this and another piece of the same canal, which you can find out on 8th Street over by the brewery over there, the oldest in-use water conveyance in the valley. So when we talk about the history of this place and why it's important to SRP, the water that runs through that canal out there is the oldest in-use water conveyance in the valley that is still in use, as far as we know. And that water would have flowed down, it would have followed the street up there, and it would have wound up at the Hayden Flour Mill, which is of course what Mill Avenue is named for, and that's what powered the grinding stones at the mill there. So, what happened? The Bureau of Reclamation, they're the owners and operators, the owners of this canal. SRP is the operator of the canal. They realized that the canal was of such historic importance that it needed to stay here. So when ASU approached Reclamation and SRP and said, we'd like to build a building on this spot, well, all of a sudden it was a problem. This canal had been designated as a historic canal and needed to be left in place. And so that's the rest of the story here. Jorge is going to pick up and tell you a little bit more about that canal, but I'm going to turn it over to Jean now, and she's going to tell you a little bit about some of the other historical things that intersect on this triangle of land. So thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Right. Jean Robinson, I'm with ASU. I'm the Historic Preservation Coordinator here. We always like to start, I start like Dan does with the disclaimer that I was not involved in this project at the very beginning. As you can imagine, anything that's developed of this nature at ASU is years, I say maybe as much as 10 years in the making. And so I've been in my role for a couple of years. I've worked as an architect in the Office of the University Architect, and I work in various roles now. So I love listening to Dan's story. You know, archaeologists are amazing, you know, and just being a historic preservationist here at ASU is, it's a learning experience for me every day. You know, what do archaeologists do? Well, what they do is they dig down below the surface of the earth and they put together these stories that tell us about our history that are not apparent. You know, they find artifacts, they find bones, they find, who knows what they'll find. They find old canals and they tell the story of the civilizations that were here before us. So thank you, Dan, for what you do. What we're showing here is probably, and what I'm going to talk about is more in the, not the prehistoric significance of this site, but the historic significance of the site. You know, as you can see, there are, by the color coding, there are various different lines of transportation and or sustenance for society or a civilization that lived here before us. That's what that represents. I have to say that just at the beginning when this presentation sort of came about, because the historic preservation, the annual historic preservation for Arizona conference last year had a theme called Cultural Crossroads. And I just thought, let me just ask Tom whether or not that fits this project. And his answer was, it's perfect for that theme. And so, and it truly is, because if we look at the various, you know, the canal that came through, we also are showing here an old rail spur that has remnants on the side, as well as the old historic US 80 highway that also traversed this site at some point. You know, most of us remember, you know, an old gas station sitting on this site for years and years and years, you know, and now we have this beautiful building. It's just amazing what ASU has had the opportunity to do within a very significant historic and archaeological site. So Tom talks about the difficulty of the site. Well, it was difficult as well from a historic standpoint. Anything that ASU does has to be basically somewhat approved by the State Historic Preservation Office, with so many different features, and this particular area being in the La Plaza area, which is a significant archaeological zone. It's important that we consult with SHPO, and we do that on almost every project that we have on the Tempe campus, just because of the significance of our location here in Tempe. So you can kind of see the old black and white photograph shows maybe an old highway. It's hard to really know. It looks like just another street. The canal you can see is sort of daylighting there, and a remnant of an old rail spur that actually serviced the old creamery, which started out as an ice house. At one point in time in history, the creamery was a predominant employer of the city of Tempe. So maybe as much as 17% of the population of Tempe worked at the creamery or had product that went through the creamery and then was transferred to other parts of the country. So that rail spur was important to actually enliven the area and to be able to send your product, the milk and the cream and the butter, to other parts of the country. So that was very significant. That was there until the mid 1900s, when the Borden Dairy, which had bought the original creamery, actually sold it, and it is now Four Peaks Brewery. So it's been a site that's been active for many years and is still active. In fact, those buildings are on the National Register of Historic Places, so it's a significant site. The photo on the right, or my right anyway, is the old depot. You know, as the spur would come off, it would then head west to other parts of the city and the state, and then various places to California and the Northwest. So here you can see the remnant of the old rail spur. Not much of that spur is left in the area here, and I have to credit Architekton for seeing the significance historically of this. So what they did was they actually lifted the rails. First of all, I guess documented where they were located, lifted the rails, saved them, and then replaced them in the hardscape of the building. So they were thinking in terms of how do we do this and not destroy the historic site, the significance of the site, and the various components that are impacted here. Obviously, the canal had a significant impact on how the building interacts with the ground plane, but to be able to have some forethought and think about how the rail can actually be integrated into the hardscape, I think was, it was just, I think it's genius. And here you can sort of see a bicyclist, which we have a lot of it on the ASU campus, using that as a means to traverse the hardscape of the courtyard. There you can see it from above. Another historic component was the US 80 that actually came from Savannah, Georgia. So the history of US 80 is very convoluted in many ways. You know, it started out as early as 1914 on the east coast of the country with the intention of creating a coast-to-coast highway, a paved road that would be in the southern part of the United States and would be able to allow people to travel from coast to coast. So it started in Savannah, and then it went as far as Dallas, Texas, at which point it sort of stalled. But it picked up eventually and kind of took on some of the existing roadways that existed in the throughout the states that traveled all the way to California. So intentionally, it was to go from Savannah, Georgia, all the way to San Diego and meet up with the 101 that runs the height of California. So in Arizona, this highway actually came through Texas, down through the southeast part of the state in Douglas, came up through Tucson, Phoenix, and then through Yuma, and then over to California. So some of the same paths that the I-10 now follows, and the I-8 also. So there was very little of this highway left on our site, but you can kind of see it right there. It's pretty disheveled and not in good shape. But again, the thinking was, can we implement this in our hardscape? And indeed, they found ways to do it. I should backtrack a little bit just to show, again, the archaeology. They paint these stories. They discover the stories of the past. So this is a picture of the old Highway 80 bed before it was paved, and you can see the different layers, the gravel base. And so I'm told the old stagecoach route that took that same route at some point in our history. But again, you know, the concrete, not in very good shape, was pulled up and salvaged and then cut into different layers so that the aggregate was exposed, and then used in the hardscape, in the new hardscape, as dividing lines for that new hardscape. So you can actually see that there's one little piece. I don't think I have a laser on this. Well, you can see the one that's a little bit discolored or colored differently over by the bollard. That is a piece of the original highway implemented in the existing hardscape. So this is where we transition to, Jorge is going to talk about the history of the canal a little bit and just how the canal being where it was impacted the design. I just can't leave though without mentioning, Tom tells us stories about, he's a local, and how he and his friends used to play in the canal, swim in the canal. Not recommended, but nonetheless, you can see the photograph there. It obviously proves that that was a pleasure ground for people for generations. So here we have Jorge.
Thank you very much, Jean. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. Good or early afternoon. My name is Jorge Garcia. I'm actually a graduate of ASU. So go Devils, you know. I'm a senior principal engineer for Salt River Project. I was actually hired right out of college by SRP. So I work on all the major water projects, you know, for Salt River Project all over the state. And about 5 years ago, Tom's team at ASU came over to SRP and presented this idea. And so very early on, we realized that this was going to be a very significant project. And I got involved and been working with Tom the whole time and a lot of ASU management that some of them have moved on now. But yeah, this place is very interesting to us because it is the oldest operational canal that we have in our system to date. This canal is actually owned by the Bureau of Reclamation, branch of the federal government. And it happens to be a designated historic channel that like Dan Garcia mentioned. What that means that when it's a historic channel, it means that it really limits the abilities to do any improvements. But really the most important thing is that the channel cannot be piped, cannot be buried underground, it has to stay open. So here's a picture of the canal, what it used to look like. It's actually, this picture is looking towards University Road, looking kind of in the northwest direction. So this is what the channel looked like before the improvements started happening. You can see the light rail train there behind. And this picture right here actually is kind of generally looking pretty close in that same direction. So you can see the significant changes, you know, that have occurred. Some of the challenges for me as a civil engineer was ensuring, you know, that we met the obligations of our customers downstream. What I mean by that is we actually, in about a mile east of here, we still have City of Tempe residents with acre lots homes that still use irrigation water. And we also have some schools, you know, by the City of Tempe that also still irrigate raw water. So some of the challenges for me were, one, I had to design the channel around the structural columns, you know, that you see behind us. Originally, I wanted all engineers like things to be straight. And I asked Tom and their engineers, hey, can you move these columns? But yeah, so I came up with an idea to kind of meander the channel, somewhat like a lazy river, to be honest, to go around. And it ended up working out well. Another requirement by the Bureau of Reclamation is that when you have an open channel, at least on one side, you have to have a maintenance road. And that's kind of what the road on the west side of the channel, that dirt path there, that's intended for the ditch to be maintained. SRP has a unique agreement with the federal government that we executed back in 1917, where the federal government allowed SRP to operate and maintain their system. So that's why we have to have some kind of maintenance path, particularly on open channels. Another challenge was that because there is all the agriculture downstream is now gone for the most part. There's development. There's only a few, customers or subdivisions that actually order water. So a concern was that at times the channel would go dry. And so one of the things that ASU requested very early on was that the ditch, could hold water at all times. So I came up with a structure that's at the other end of the building that kind of acts like a dam to hold up the water. And then we also have another, we call it a weir structure on the east end of the building to make sure that there's always water held within the, within the building limits. Another thing, and this is all really up to from Tom's team and his architects. I don't know if you guys have you looked at the ditch, but the ditch has these step pop outs. The geometry of the channel is always changing. It's not very consistent. That's something that I'll tell you we don't do. I don't do. Engineers again like things to stay constant, but with ASU's request to make the channel aesthetically pleasing for everybody, and with Tom's help, they developed this little diagram that kind of shows you some of the geometry. In the dash, you kind of see the traditional geometry of the ditch. So it was difficult for me to calculate the engineering calcs to figure out a desired depth. That wasn't fun. Thank you, Tom. But I got to tell you, it looks beautiful. We do not have, SRP does not have any channel that looks like this. And I would argue that in the whole Southwest. So this is very neat for me. I was proud of, to be work with this project, and makes it more special that I attended here at ASU. So really neat. And this is just another picture from the rural road, kind of looking east. You can see the, again, this is a credit to Tom's and Architekton and his team of architects. Bureau Reclamation, wanted to keep some of the original channel the way it looked, and we were able to incorporate both ends to help meet the requirements of the Bureau. And here's a picture of all of us. I do want to say that I would like to thank ASU management, Tom and his team, SRP management, Native American tribes, because it wasn't, we didn't all see eye to eye in the beginning, and I think all groups came together and gave in a little bit, and we got the project done for the benefit of everybody. And I think everyone is real pleased. I can tell you that I've got a lot of connections with some of the Native American tribes, and I have brought some of them here, and I can't tell you how much they really appreciate that the channel was left open, because most places they lose those kind of battles and development wins. So kudos to ASU and willing to spend, extra money to maintain this really nice looking place. With that, Tom, I think that's it for me, and you're up.
Thanks, George. I just need this one. So George is being modest too. This project almost died multiple times, and several of them were over the ditch. And it was one of those things where everybody wanted to do the right thing. It was just that there were so many rules. And so our team collectively learned how to kind of walk that minefield and solve them one at a time. So we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, just a little bit about the future. So it's really great to be able to share the stories of this building. I've never done a project with more stories or with more reason for what we did. So some of the sustainability features, Jason, I know you're getting ready to roll out the digital signage that will help explain some of these. These aren't all of them, but the team started with, everybody asked about LEED, about living, building, future challenges, about well building. The team looked at all of those metrics, not that we were going to try to meet all of them, but a lot of them just represent good design ideas. So we actually kept charts about, okay, which ones are we fulfilling? What are we missing? So that those decisions were made consciously. Energy reduction was a big thing. We talk about EUI, it's the energy use index. It's a way of comparing buildings. We could have walked away with a 171 on the green bar and we would have been fine. The team set a goal of 100. We got to 107. So we were pretty excited about that. There are impact areas that are identified to get credit for this. You have to be at least 10% reduction in 3 of those. So this building excelled, and I learned a lot of new words. It's sort of the first move was a passive one. So how do we take care of the sun on the building? So how many of you have heard the story of the exterior skin? I'm just curious. Okay, so that word's getting around. That's really exciting for us. So obviously it's a biomimic move based on cactus. This was a real early design idea. We probably did, well, we clearly did hundreds of iterations to make the skin work, to make it buildable, to make it affordable. And so the whole concept is, how do we keep the windows protected from direct solar gain? Any of you that have been in a greenhouse know what that's about. And the other one was, how do we take heat off the face of the building? So we went through these parametric exercises. A lot of this building could not have happened if we didn't have predictive analytics. The computer software that's available out there is mind-blowing. And we literally designed the building based on information we were getting back from that early modeling. So every facade has a different set of shades on it because the solar angles are different on each of the facades. I love the photo in the upper left. Gene's department did this with solar imaging. But what it's showing is the orange and the red are about 120 degrees, and the skin and the windows behind that are about 100 degrees. So the result is we're taking 20 degrees off of the envelope of the building and off of the cooling loads right at the face of the building. And that's a really exciting find. So not only is it beautiful, which was aesthetics was a requirement, but it's a functional aesthetic. And I think that makes it even more beautiful. The other thing was daylight. We were pleased to hear that one of the biggest comments we got from researchers as they were moving in was how much daylight was in the building. Because when you look at the building from afar, some of it looks solid, right? Depending on what angle you're at. And so everybody was delighted with how far we were able to drive daylight into the wet labs. Another big move on the energy front was something that you're all living with, and that's the radiant cooling. This is the second all radiant cooled building that ASU's done. The law building downtown was the first. We did a test project over at CAVC several years ago to try to get everybody kind of used to what the system is. So the blue is the 3 different types of radiant panels that we have. So the chilled beams are in the labs, the radiant panels are in the closed offices, and the chilled sails are in the open office spaces. So about 90% of the building we're able to cool that way. We also looked at the micro level. So courtyard buildings are a very appropriate response in the Southwest. They've been doing them for 1,000 years, so it makes sense. This was one of the buildings that IHO moved out of. So we basically wrapped the program around the inner courtyard. You'll notice from the inside of the building that we tried to put most of the active spaces on the E-Lab face. So the conference rooms, the sort of collaborative areas, all kind of face out into the E-Lab. And part of that was to get people to be able to see nature. So being able to grow plants on the floor of the E-Lab was important. If you look at the older courtyard buildings, they almost are all semi-tropical because they don't have enough light. So we'll talk a little bit about how we balance that. Everything was thought through. There weren't capricious decisions. Even the color of the E-Lab was meant to invoke some psychological cooling effect because we wanted to extend the ability for it to be used throughout the year. This is a really great graphic. So the top one is all the months of the year that would be out of the comfort zone for humans in the courtyard if we didn't do anything. So the first thing we did was we looked at shading, and that gives us more time of the year that it's available. And then we started working with the wind, and that gave us even more years. There's not a lot we can do about June, July, and August. It's the desert. The goal was to make those shoulder months more comfortable. And a lot of that had to do with the shading. So now the trick with the shading was we needed 6 hours of sunlight on the ground plane, but we also needed to shade the south face of this building. So it was a little bit of a dance. And if you're on the south face of this building, especially in the winter, you do get direct sun, but know that that's keeping the plants alive in the E-Lab. So we were able to fine tune the cantilevered shade structure using, again, that computer analysis. I've never gotten to do wind studies. The predictive tools are brand new, but we were able to run predictions. And the goal was, how do you keep out the hairdryer winds of the summer and create breezes and allow breezes to come in the other times of the year to help with comfort. So we not only tuned it for the solar, but we were able to tune it. It's out of control. We were able to tune it for the wind, and we actually sized the apertures that open up into the outside to help create that convection. The only thing the computer couldn't predict was the value of pulling the wind over the water and what that transpiration. We know it works. We just weren't able to put metrics to it. So the building had to work with the other buildings around it too. So we were able to do wind studies that showed the effects. We plugged buildings into empty sites to see how they would affect it, to try to protect these breeze effects as the city develops around it. I think you've seen that one 3 times. And just real briefly, almost done because we want to get to some Q&A. But research buildings want to be concrete frames because of vibration, because of creating spaces that can be easily remodeled. So concrete's one of the worst things for embodied carbon. So McCarthy, the builder, was a great partner in this. There's basically 3 different structural base systems as you move around the building. Each one of them was evaluated for something that had never been done in Arizona called void form concrete. And the only bad part about using this is you can't see it. So that's why we're excited about the signage. And what McCarthy determined was on the south wing, this bar over here, it not only helped us reduce the carbon, it was less expensive. So that's a story that will go out into the building community now and encourage other people to use this. So basically they ship these engineered 14-inch balls made out of recycled plastic. They came caged up so that all that the contract sub had to do was put them in place. It was engineered to the point where they could actually, for the topping out ceremony, put in the colored balls in the right place, and ended up with this great image here, which again, I think we can do the video on the digital signage now, right? Instead of just a static one. So a lot of hard work. That's a fraction of the people that were here on site. It was pretty exciting. The other thing we did was, and this is pretty common, was used fly ash to displace the Portland concrete. We did it to an extent that hadn't been done on other buildings. We pushed it to 40%, which normally has problems with workability and color. And we, again, worked with McCarthy to come up with the one that was going to be pleasing. We have a challenge here that I'm going to leave you guys with. The fly ash was coming from the coal-fired plants in the northern part of Arizona, which have now thankfully closed down. But there's no inexpensive fly ash left. So if somebody wants to come up with a replacement for fly ash to help reduce the carbon content of concrete all over the state, there's an open invitation. And then finally, I just want to finish with this slide so that you understand that the care that was given by the ASU team for the occupants. We set up this material selection protocol, and it was, I don't know if you can actually read that, but it was things like all the outgassing that happens with materials in buildings, especially new buildings. You smell it when you walk in. We're now starting to pay attention to that. And so it was not only the stuff that the contractor bought, but the material selection protocol was also applied to the furniture that ASU bought. So there was a lot of care given for the health of the occupants and creating a healthy building for them. So we're at Q&A.
Who has questions?
I think that applause was that we were finally at Q&A, so that's good.
Tom, I just want to say one of the things is we've lived in this building. Our discovering so many things. And one of the most pleasant discoveries that I've had was with the cantilevered shade pieces when we had some hail over the winter. As it was hitting it, it sounded like wind chimes. It was actually the most delightful new sound. So it's like, it's one of these unintended consequences.
Accidents of art.
Yeah.
Plato called them accidents of art. Yeah.
Who has questions?
I have a question. How many people lived in the valley prehistorically? I love this.
Oh, I don't have a good answer for that, Tom. So it's just I'll cage it with, it's really hard for archaeologists to know how many people lived here. We know that there were lots of villages everywhere. We know there were canals everywhere, but we don't get to observe how many people lived here. But one estimate that's floating around is at the height of Hulagun occupation of the valley, we're talking about 250,000 people that would have lived in the valley and who would have lived on lands irrigated by the canal system. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
What was the total what was the total timeline from initial commission of the project to breaking ground? And then a follow-up to that, after breaking ground and you guys starting, do any other changes occur?
So it was about 2.5 years after we interviewed for the project that we were able to break ground. I think Gene alluded to the 5 or 6 years that preceded that to get the site in place, to get the program, to get the financing. So these are 10-year projects, another slightly over 2 years to build it. I think the only really, they did this through the pandemic, which was amazing. And then they had a fire about 8 months before it was supposed to. Those of you that saw it, it looked horrible. It wasn't as bad as it looked, fortunately, and McCarthy was able to recover and still deliver the building on time. It didn't actually affect it. So I've never worked on a higher functioning collaborative team from all levels, from ASU through the design team. We all got along great. We're going to go to each other's weddings. It's kind of amazing. And then McCarthy was right there with us. So with the builders, it was really amazing.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. I'm really into biomimicry, so I'm very excited that you've done this. I have 3 questions actually. So the first one is, I'm wondering if you can tell us more about what you ended up using from the Living Building Challenge. I'm very fascinated by that space in particular. And then the second question, I know that might be difficult, but I know one of the cement alternatives that exists now, and I'm not sure if it exists in the US, but is called Calera, which is basically a carbon, not just neutral, but carbon positive kind of cement, because it actually takes CO2 from the atmosphere to create the cement. So I'm wondering if this is something you've looked into. And then the third question, and maybe it's not to you, but it's to us to think about. I'm wondering if in our next phases of like thinking how we grow with this place, if there's any thoughts of giving even more back to the, Hohokam and the indigenous communities who did use the canals mostly for growing food. If there are plans for us to think about that as something that we can expand on. And I'm particularly thinking of the southeast corner here that seems not used, that could be an amazing food forest, for example. So this is maybe a question to us to think about. Thank you so much.
So there's actually 3 different areas. The landscape was very well thought out too, had a very talented designer. In fact, they were responsible for a lot of the canal, a lot of the historic design ideas. In that corner you talked about, that's actually retention, so that we hold 100-year flood, but it's also a mesquite grove. So mesquite represents a very important food crop for the original inhabitants here. The other one is there's an agave garden up here at the corner, which is another ode to that. And then the third is the ASU has I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's basically a food crop program on the Tempe campus. So like the dates along Palm Walk get harvested every year. We've got a pomegranate grove over here that will become part of that, that infrastructure across the site. Honestly, I don't think we do enough to integrate our neighbors into these buildings and these projects, and we're always looking for opportunities to do that. On the living futures, we came really close to getting a carbon pedal and a water pedal. I will tell you how difficult it is to explain to people how hard it was to take the canal, turn it into a storage tank, and then use it for drip irrigation on the site. And people that don't live here don't. It was really fun to explain. The Grimshaw team, our partner, was from New York, and we just had a blast explaining. We went bike riding, and it was really great to explain that. And no, we do have a challenge. We need somebody to import that material. So we're still waiting for somebody to take that step. So that's all. Those are all great insights. Thank you.
And Sarah, thank you for your question. I can tell you also that the university has been working with the local tribes and nations, and had this, by having this facility the way it is now, the tribes have been able to come back here and have very private ceremonies on this ground that they did not have access to previously. They tend to keep those very, very private and do them on off hours, but that is something that has also been made available as something that didn't exist before, which is really a lovely thing to be able to integrate and welcome, as Tom said, our neighbors into this area.
I know that one of the groups that SRP was at the Yaqui that wanted to make sure that part of the story that was told.
Yeah, that's correct. So the Pascua Yaqui are a tribe that have land around Tucson, but they're not native to Arizona. They come from northern Mexico, where they were pushed out in the early 1900s. And at that time, SRP was in need of a workforce. And so SRP used to drive buses literally to northern Mexico and pick up Yaqui workers. And so Yaqui natives made up a large part of the SRP workforce in the early 1900s, and still do to this day. There are descendants of those folks here, and there are living communities here. So when we were looking at what the signs content should be, we did talk with the Yaqui folks who live in town here in the town of Guadalupe, and they did request to be discussed in the signage. And so that does honor their role in operating and maintaining the canal system here.
You'll see a photo of them in the digital signage. Was part of that outreach effort.
Yeah, thanks so much for this presentation. It would be wonderful to get a copy of it for our faculty and students who couldn't attend today. I think they would learn a lot, because we had a lot of questions about the sustainability features of the building. And I was interested to hear about the drip irrigation. I'm wondering if you could speak to more water conservation features of the building or the landscaping.
Yeah, well, first of all, there will be jump drives available for sale on your way out. Just stop at the table. You can get autographs. It's the whole. We would love to, we've done this before. We've left the story of the building with the people there, and the more people that know it, I think the better, right? I'm sorry, your second, I was goofing around, your second, water so that was a big issue. So normally the way the irrigation water is used, it's non-potable water. I think Phoenix is almost exclusively using it for their drinking water. So it's used in a lot of different ways across the valley, but the traditional use was flood irrigation. I think you've all seen that. It's incredibly good for the plants. It's incredibly wasteful for the water. So this is now the second project where we've taken the resource of the potable water and used it to drip irrigate the crops, the landscape on the site. It takes a lot to do that. It takes a lot to run those kind of materials. ASU is still in that learning curve of how all that works. But what it becomes is it takes this site off of the domestic water use that the city has to produce. So there's an energy savings, there's a transportation savings, there's a resource savings that is really hard to calculate the value of that. And this resource is available all over the valley. You saw the maps. Most of you don't even realize, but if you start looking, you'll see the little concrete structures on corners through the neighborhoods throughout the valley. That's all got piped water. It's all available for use by in fact, it's a requirement that it be available. And so I think there's systems, there's neighborhood systems that we could be doing to help relieve the use of domestic water for a use that the plants do much better on the lake water, honestly. It's got the nutrients and stuff.
Tom, just real quick, because this is one of the more prominent features that we all see every day. Can you speak to the HVAC system and the condensation runoff that we have over here and part of that conservation, capture, and reuse?
That is the other story we're telling. And this is something that they actually do better in Tucson because they don't have the canal system that we have. They don't have the lakes that we have. But there's a number of sources of water on a site like this. One is rainwater. And that's easy to capture. You know, that's a no-brainer. The second is gray water, which we're still not doing very well. We've proposed it several times. There was going to be a demonstration project here. It didn't happen. It's going to happen eventually, which is really great. And that's a toilet to tap presentation, which is extremely exciting. And then there's the condensate. You know, we talk about it being a dry heat, but there's a lot of water. And part of making cool air is condensing that water out of the air. That's part of that phase change that creates the cool air for us. So we chose to expose that in 2 places on the building. And that's the water you see running down over here in the silver trough and in the stairwell right behind me here. And so part of it is we wanted you to see the volume of that because it's a remarkable amount of water. It's also distilled water, which is kind of amazing. Unfortunately, the codes right now don't let you mix gray water, rainwater, and the evaporative water together in a single tank. So it becomes cost prohibitive to try to store those and reuse it on the site. That's something we're working on changing. This just goes in. So the whole site, so we talked about capturing the rainwater. So the civil engineer and the landscape architect were awesome. High part of the site, low corner of the site, all the water that falls on the site, all the condensate water is channeled through, you can follow it through the landscape. And it ends up on the corner out here and it waters all of those plants too. So it's called bioswales, where you try to get direct the runoff so that it does good before it's gone, right? Great questions.
I came in a little bit late, so I don't know if you've already talked about the construction of the walkway, the elevated walkway, and it seemed like it took a long time. And I was wondering if you encountered any structural issues or anything like that in the process. And I was also wondering if you could talk about temperature control on this variable cooling system that you've installed.
Okay, let's start with the walkway. The walkway is pretty straightforward, but because it was exposed concrete, it did take some care to do. You can't just throw it down like you would a slab that you're going to cover with a carpet. It's pretty straightforward. The idea was to create a walkway around the inside of the building so that we capture the public and they can walk around and look at Lucy and look inside your labs. So as part of that transparency we were going for. The only tricky part of the walkway besides the bridge was this part over here. You'll see these rods hanging down. They're actually cables. That part of it's actually hung from the structure above. Other than that, it's really pretty straightforward. There were waterproofing issues over the top of this building that we had to take care of too. The bridge was actually technically a separate project, but clearly part of the building. So it links 2 existing elevators on either side. So it was cheaper to build. So it was the right place to put the bridge. We spent a little money kind of pulling the look of the building across the bridge. The real money was in creating the shade structure. And Ed Saltero, who was the university architect, just recently moved on, talked about creating shade networks in the campus. And having grown up here, I watch people walk from shade to shade. It's really funny on the golf course because they golf shade to shade. It's a really important thing here. I don't know why we don't have more. I saw a comedian in Scottsdale and his first line was, I just flew into town. Is shade illegal here? And it seems like that, but part of that gift was how do you get people to walk that far? Well, you give them shade, you give them plants, you make it a good experience. It also needed to function as a gateway, so it becomes iconic. The really great thing is how transparent it is. You can kind of see from what photo are you looking over? This photo over here. You know, I showed it to my then 11-year-old daughter, and she said, "That ain't gonna shade anything." But if you go out there, there's always shade. And that was part of being able to tune that with a computer. And we also wanted it to glow at night. That was part of it. It became a lantern in that entry into the ASU campus. There was another question in there. The temperature control. So this is a really fascinating thing. People ask, well, how are you doing with LEED? I should say, we just submitted answers to the first round of questions. We're tracking LEED Platinum. With any luck at all, we got all the answers. They always ask questions, and they actually was on very few points. So we felt very fortunate. Again, a really good team put that package together. So we hope to have some news on that fairly quick. But the fact is, buildings don't use energy. People use energy. So ASU makes the determination on set points. The design team balances with budget, how many thermostats go in so that you get more localized control. That's the goal. We try to do it by exposures. So anything up against the glass kind of gets combined because it's going to get that extra heat and needs probably a little bit extra cool. We're getting better and better at that. We're also starting to control the intake air, which is really exciting, so that we have just the right amount, because that's a big energy use to cool 120 degree air over the recycled air. It's going to be interesting. We'd love to come back and do a survey, probably give it another 6 or 8 months, because all of these, doesn't matter what system you use, it takes a while to get a building tuned. So we want to get it through all 4 seasons. But we do want to come back and do a user comfort survey and see how it's performing. That, to us, that's the best performance. Are people comfortable? And you know how difficult that is, because in our office, which we have a terrible system, of course, but we've got people with hoodies sitting next to people who have fans on their desks, right? So as humans, just my wife and I, we fight over the thermostat. The really bad part is we can do it on our phones from bed now. That's not helping. So there's a lot of variability in there. It's one of the biggest challenges we face.
There's been several references about this signage and information about this building. This is an ongoing project that is managed through the architect's office and the university, and it's been in negotiation with many stakeholders across the valley. We did just launch a website at globalfutures.asu.edu/Walton Center that has all of the information in the slides that you saw here tonight. And that will be, once the physical signage is integrated across the site, they will be directing to the website. But if you want to go there now, please feel free. All right. Thank you all for that presentation. That was awesome. It is now my pleasure to introduce one of ASU's exciting creative partners who's worked with the ASU brand enterprise and Architekton to help create a special and unique identity for this building. Justin Katz is an acclaimed creative director and 11-time Emmy Award winner with the local design firm Flock of Pixels, a virtual micro agency that he founded in 2008. With an extensive background in design and advertising, Justin is an expert at crafting compelling narratives that resonate with clients and audiences alike. Over the course of his career, Justin has worked with a roster of clients that include Apple, American Express, Disney, Meta, NXP, and of course, ASU. His innovative and narrative-driven designs can be seen in high-profile projects such as iCarly on Paramount Plus, Super Bowl commercials, ESPN specials, and Sun Devil games. Justin and his team at Flock Pixels were commissioned to create this signature graphic that you're about to see for the Walton Center, and he's here today to talk about the process for which he got to it. So, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having us here today. I've got 2 of my creative partners in the audience right now, Erica Brooks and Kevin Lashak. Kevin was actually lead designer on the project you're going to see today. I'd like to thank the team of architects and archaeologists and engineers for a wonderful presentation. I learned so much, even more than from our initial meetings we had on this. Just totally incredible. I want a copy, or I need a copy of that, the slide of all the canals. Just super interesting stuff. So like you heard, I'm Justin Katz, creative director at Flock of Pixels. We were commissioned to create a signature graphic for this building. So in this presentation, I'll go over a bit of the process in creating the graphic, its use cases, and some additional insights. Doing two things at once. See if it works. There we go. To get things started, let me tell you a bit about Flock of Pixels and why we love working with ASU on high-profile projects like this. Flock of Pixels operates on one single core philosophy: to really care about what we do, or as we like to say, give a flock. That means only taking on projects we can dedicate the proper time, care, and energy to, and never saying we are done, only that it's due. We focus on story first and let design emerge from the narrative. A few immediate examples you may have seen: our #1 innovation video and getting steady updates, or my partner Kevin's work developing the identity system for the Phoenix Art Museum. So where do these creative endeavors begin? With a creative brief. This is the creative brief given to us by the ASU team. As you'll see, they included the PIK building as reference. It may not look like much, but it contains 5 core principles. 1, create a signature graphic. Aim for an abstract silhouette style. Note that the building represents collaboration, that the building is a powerful symbol of the laboratory, and it must reflect ASU's brand and GFL's position within the org. So where do we begin? It's a little delayed, with some research. First of all, what is a signature graphic? Honestly, I'd never heard the term before, but we need to create something for it. It's not a full brand, it's not an icon or a logo, but a supporting graphic used to represent a shorthand for the entire building itself. So do other buildings have signature graphics? And are they all recognizable silhouettes? Do they tell a story, just represent the architecture, or both? How does the Walton Center compare to these other buildings? Is there a clear angle for a recognizable silhouette? Is the skin the most important, most iconic feature? The water, the history? How do occupants use, I love that we're using this photo again. How do occupants use the building? What's more important, the story or the architecture? And what is that story? Early on, when exploring multiple viewpoints and perspectives of the Walton Center, it became apparent that a traditional, distinctive silhouette wasn't going to work for a building that is far from traditional. We had a long meeting with Architekton to find out everything we could about their design, from their initial research into biomimicry, the indigenous history of the site, the prevailing winds, canal systems, solar integrations, etc. What stood out for us was the philosophy and environmental factors that dictated its design, but more than anything, how it was designed for interaction. In fact, what makes the Walton Center building so unique is what it lacks: a classical front elevation. No silhouette, no problem. Instead, the center supports multiple equally weighted and interesting approach angles, where each entrance, exit, and improvised route invites a fresh experience. Instead, the center supports multiple equally weighted and interesting approach angles. For each entrance, inside the novel space encourages improvisatory and organic interaction, helping spark unique and innovative ideas as disciplines literally collide in conversation. Like to think of the building as a brilliant encourages play, experimentation, break, and things spelled out literally for our perspective. May have a better metaphor. Either way, all jazz. A dynamic building all drives practical. Call it improvised perspective. As well as the Finding elements and further purpose development. Building built by conversation that shapes limited conversational icons that also represent the mark of the building. Another look at that. Any graphic user to live and work by brand. Bold and secondary colors help match the dominant blue. How will we created dynamic all while making that embroidered on a hat, imprinted on a shirt, patterned out in large scale. Here's a closer look at the building. On so that here we abstracted scale. And here's the I will talk about. And for design, there's a little the graphic is intended to represent the actual building. Also meant to remind everyone of the building's purpose. Walton Center was designed to promote gathering and interdisciplinary interaction, spark conversation, and lighten with different perspectives. These events that inspire this better, inspire a new. And not just walking into a building, but walking into a Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. And we have the first instance of how we're integrating it into we have lanyards for everybody here that come from the hotel on your way out. We'll also distribute across all of the staff and faculty who are based here in the building. So as we now all need our Isaac cards, our ASU cards to get anywhere in this place, no better way to access it than with this. So Justin, thank you so much for this. Are there any questions for Justin before we break up? I know, look at that. We had this down. Justin, thank you. Dan, Tom, Jean, George, thank you all so much. Thanks to everybody who's helping to make this place so active. It's been a great year so far, and we're looking forward to continuing to move in and use this place. So thank you all so much. We'll see you on Friday, 9 a.m.